All right. So it looks like we are ready to go. And I would like to welcome all of those who were able to participate and join this session. On behalf of the Armenian National Committee of America Western Region, which is the largest and most influential nonpartisan Armenian American grassroots advocacy organization, it is my great pleasure to host this educational panel on the upcoming California redistricting. My name is Edward Barsumyan, and I'm the Government Affairs Coordinator of the Western Region, and I will be assisted today by our Canadian Fellow, Ms. Alexia Nordikian. This session will be recorded and made available to the public via our various social media accounts. And if you have any questions, you can message them to me in the chat, and they will be brought up to the commissioner during the Q&A portion at the end of the presentation. A small disclaimer, this session is for educational purposes only, and we will not be taking suggestions on redistricting at this time. There will be an opportunity for that at a later date. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce California Citizens Redistricting Commissioner Linda Akutagawa. Linda Akutagawa is President and CEO of LEAP, the Leadership Education for Asian Pacifics. A passionate social entrepreneur for over 25 years and beneficiary of LEAP's leadership programming, she is a believer in the value and urgent need for diverse, equitable, and inclusive leadership. Through LEAP, Linda has dedicated herself to continuing the cycle of leadership development and inspiring Asian and Pacific Islanders to step up to the leadership roles across sectors, industries, and communities. She's the chair of the Alliance for Board Diversity and an appointed member of the California Department of Insurance Diversity Task Force. She is also a member of the Asian American Institute Advisory Board at California State University, Los Angeles, as well as a board member of the Asian Pacific Planning and Policy Council. She's nationally recognized speaker and facilitator on leadership, diversity, equity and inclusion, nonprofits, and board governance. Linda received her BA in International Business with a minor in economics from California State University, LA. She has a certificate in nonprofit board consulting through BoardSource, that is. She is married and a fur mom to her cockapoo, and auntie to 11 nephews and nieces. She is registered as no party preference. So having introduced our wonderful commissioner, I would like to now begin by giving you the floor and encouraging you now to take this opportunity to speak.
All right. Thank you so much. And I do appreciate all of you for inviting us or inviting me to come and present to your members. And I appreciate what you said about that this is an educational presentation. I am obligated to say and to remind everyone that that our California Government Code Section 82533 strictly forbids commissioners and staff from taking public input outside of a regularly scheduled commission meeting or official public input meeting. But I do also want to remind you all that not only will there be an additional later time where we will be holding public input meetings, you can also do so in writing through our website, or also through our communities of interest tool, and I'll be telling you a little bit more about those ways in which it can be done. But before I begin, perhaps I can just go and tell you something else about myself. Why did I, decide to apply to the commission? One of the reasons why is I feel like I wanted to do something to give back to the people of California. And one of the things that I do in the work that I do is around encouraging Asian and Pacific Islanders to step up to leadership. And I really felt that this was a time where I needed to put my money where my mouth is and to do something where I can, frankly, I'm not interested in running for public office, but this was still something that I can do on behalf of our communities, our diverse communities, and also still be civically engaged. And so I will say that this has been a great experience. I serve with 13 other people, so there's a total of 14 commissioners, and I really do like and respect all of us. And by the way, I also want to encourage you that if you're ever interested in watching our meetings, please, feel free. We live stream all of them, and you could really get a sense of who we are as a commission, but also really thinking about how you too can also be involved as well too. So Edward, I want to thank you and Araxia for having me here and being able to again be able to speak about how we can get your members involved. So with that, let me go ahead and start with this particular slide. So what is redistricting? And the reason why we're doing these redistricting public education or redistricting basics presentations is, we realize that redistricting is not something that is thought of often. And I'll share a quick story. When I told a friend and colleague that I had been appointed to the commission, he just said that redistricting, after congratulating me, he says it is a underappreciated function, and I realize now very much why. So we have a joke amongst the commissioners. We talked about how do we make redistricting sexy, where people really want to know more about it and get really engaged. But we realize that we're up against a little bit of a challenge. But what redistricting is redistricting is defined as drawing boundaries that determine which Californians are represented by by each electoral district. So as you see from the picture here, first we did the census, which I feel like people are generally pretty familiar with, and it's something that they were able to be involved in. Redistricting and then representation. And I think redistricting historically has not been one in which everybody was able to participate in. And I think that's possibly why maybe it's not quite as sexy as it is, but it's also something that a lot of folks were not previously engaged in as much. So why do we have to redraw these districts? We do it every 10 years because, a lot can change in 10 years. We know that communities can change because people are born, people pass away, people move out of a community, and new people move into a community. So communities can grow in size and communities can shrink in size. So districts and communities that were roughly once the same equal number of people can become unequal in size. And so these are some of the reasons why we go through this process of redistricting, and it's aligned with the census. So as we get new census numbers, it enables us to really relook at the districts and make sure that ultimately we will have districts that are roughly equal in size. So your voice, your choice. So one of the greatest powers that the people of California have is to elect our own representatives to conduct the business of our government. How the district boundaries are configured can make a difference between, empowering us and maximizing our votes, our voice, or minimizing and muting our votes and our voices. So in most states, politicians are the ones that draw their new districts, and frankly, they often end up drawing safe districts for themselves to be able to stay in office. And so what's really, I think, great about this is that we are now in a place where we can have a say in how those new district lines are drawn. Redistricting has been used at times to also exclude communities from political power by enabling all of us, the people of California, to fully participate and monitor the redistricting process. More communities have an opportunity to be able to elect candidates of their choice. So speaking up about your community is going to be critical to ensuring that our communities, your community, will be whole and to the extent that it's possible. So this ensures that your community's voice is going to be heard by your elected officials when it comes time for decision making, such as the quality and funding of your kids' education, or even determining your tax rates, or how business policy is set, or how transportation public safety is also going to be created as well too. And so therefore our input is going to be important to the shaping and the redrawing of these new political boundaries. Um, one of the other things that I want to just tell you about is, how does redistricting affect you? And we've come up with 4 ways, at least, that we believe redistricting can impact each of us as, people living in California. So first off is power to the people. So the Voters First Act was historic in California because it transferred the power of drawing district maps away from politicians and gave it to us, the people of California. One of the things that I want to mention that I think is really important, and and I just realized this fairly recently, is this is only the second time that we, the people of California, will be engaged in the process of redistricting. So kind of to my joke earlier about how the commission is trying to make redistricting sexy, it's only the second time that we're doing this. The very first commission was in 2010. We, the 2020 commission, we're only the second one. And to me, it's an opportunity that I think all of us as Californians are just starting to really kind of get our heads around, wrap our heads around it, and to really understand. And this is why these opportunities to be able to go out and speak to all of you is so important, because this is new to all of us, including us on the commission, and we're learning quickly. And as we learn, I hope and I feel that the people of California can learn along with us too. So that's why this power to the people is really important. The second way in which redistricting affects us is having a champion for our issues. So having the opportunity to elect representatives that champion our issues is important in a state like California, where it's highly diverse, and issues can then therefore vary dramatically from one street to another street, from one region to another region. So in a place like Northern California, they might be particularly interested in issues around the environment and economics, whereas in Central California, they might be focused on issues around water and agriculture. And then here in Southern California, we're going to be more focused on issues dealing with like transportation, housing, and employment. Those are just some examples. A third way in which redistricting affects us is funding. So tied to the issue of electing representatives that champion our issues, we're going to want to elect representatives that have our financial interests at heart. So when the time comes for building budgets, we are going to want representatives who are going to fight to ensure that our communities get financial resources that it deserves and that we want for the services that we need in our communities, like education, water, fire protection. Lastly, the fourth way in which redistricting affects us is community boundaries. So redistricting is all about drawing lines and determining which communities get grouped into which districts. So your input in this process is essential to helping us, the commission, and the commissioners understand where your community starts and where it ends. Tell us, the more input we can get, the better the nuance we'll have in terms of drawing district lines that really reflect what you all, the people of California, want. And I think the more information we have, the better our maps are going to be. So I just want to just remind people, redistricting is one of the few civic activities that any Californian can take part in and provide input in regards to our communities, and the kind of input that will ultimately help to impact laws and regulations, tax structures, how funding is distributed, and which services are provided. Because again, the input that you give us about your communities then go to ultimately creating district lines or electoral district lines, which then go to then enabling, hopefully the kind of elected representation that your community is going to want, which then impacts laws, regulations, tax structures, and funding, as well as services. And so an example that I would give is that if you have younger children, like let's say you have kids that are in high school, seniors in high schools, this is a great civic engagement activity for, your high school age kids to get involved in, because this is going to last for 10 years. So by the time 10 years finishes up, they will be well past, their early teenage years and well into their adulthood. And so, they'll probably, feel like they're going to want a voice in this. And this is a great practice in terms of, really engaging them civically. Now, the road to fair representation. The U.S. Constitution requires that every American receive as close to equal representation as possible in government. And as populations of districts change over time, I had mentioned that it can lead to unequal numbers in these districts. So it means that some people can be overrepresented, meaning that their elected representative does not have to meet the needs of as many people because there's less people in his or her or their district. It can also lead to underrepresentation because if a district becomes much larger in size, then that elected representative has to represent that many more people, leading to each person in the district being underrepresented. And so redistricting helps to even out the population in each of the districts. So as the federal government publishes the census numbers, and we're expecting them at this point, the raw numbers around mid-August, California must redraw the boundaries of congressional, state Senate, state assembly, and state board of equalization districts. Oops, went a little too fast. So the districts correctly reflect the latest count of the state's population. Now, redistricting is based on the idea that each of our voices should be represented fairly by creating districts that have the same number of people. Census results are used to draw new maps every 10 years to account for the ways in which populations have changed and move across states and districts. At the federal level, we just went through the process of apportionment, which takes place to reallocate U.S. House seats among states. This too is done after each national census to ensure that seats are held by states in proportion to the size of their population. Unfortunately, California did decline from having 53 House seats to 52. A little interesting factoid I'll just say about, 10 years from now when we go through the next census, even though this doesn't apply to California, New York State lost their House seat by only 89 people. So can you imagine, the people in New York State must be kicking themselves. 80, if only basically 89, say 90 to be sure, more people had responded to the census, New York would have been able to have kept their House seat. And so for California, it was more in the number of around, in the thousands. So it wasn't quite as close. But, when you think about how dramatic 89 seats or 89 people were, it's just mind boggling at times. So historically, legislatures have drawn their maps and it's allowed them to choose their constituents because they could create safe seats for themselves instead of us, the constituents being able to choose our representatives based on, fairly drawn maps. So this former system undermined the concept of fair representation. So, which is to give us, the people, the power to choose our representatives. So why does redistricting matter? I mentioned, fair representation. We've talked about how redistricting can affect us. Let me tell you about why independent redistricting matters. So democracy does depend on voters having the opportunity to choose our representatives. When elected officials draw the lines of their own districts, they do get to draw their own territory and therefore choose their own voters. On this slide, you'll see that let me show you how it's important to delegate the power of redistricting to the people. So gerrymandering can happen when election districts are drawn in a way that gives a particular set of people or a political party or a racial group an unfair political advantage over another. And in this graph here, you'll see, let's say we have a jurisdiction of 50 people, 60 orange people, and 40 purple people. And districts can be drawn in multiple ways, but not every way is fair. So the first two examples show ways in which district lines can be drawn in a fair manner, proportionately, where the district lines are drawn proportionately. The two examples on the right side show ways in which district maps are drawn in a manner that does not reflect the proportion or the population as fairly, which is referred to as gerrymandering. And this is why independent commissions like the one that California has were created, and it was to remove politics from the process and focus on the people of California. Now, when we, the commission, start to draw the district lines, we have very strict criteria that we have to follow in this order when we draw the new district lines. So first and foremost, number one is that each district must be roughly or nearly equal in size to comply with the U.S. Constitution. Number two, each district must comply with the Voting Rights Act to ensure that minorities have a fair opportunity to elect representatives of their choice. Number three, contiguity. Districts must be drawn contiguously so that all parts of the district are connected to each other. So, for example, if one district includes parts of Glendale, you can't skip over, for example, Burbank and say, okay, we're going to go over to Studio City because we want to include them in our district. You know, all of the districts must connect and touch each other. So if you have a district, it must be like, for example, Glendale, Eagle Rock, perhaps, and goes into perhaps maybe parts of, depending on which way it goes, maybe it'll go into parts of Pasadena, maybe it'll go into parts of Burbank, depending on how the district size based on equal population is. Now, districts, number four, districts, communities of interest. Districts must minimize the division of cities, counties, and neighborhoods and communities of interest to the extent possible. So as much as possible, you know, cities and counties may want to make sure that they are in one district. Communities of interest, and this is where I think it's really important, where we get feedback. You know, tell us about your communities of interest, because while we could look on a map and we could see city, county, neighborhood lines, we don't know the nuances of those neighborhoods. We don't know the nuances of communities of interest. And so, for example, like in Glendale, you know, you have like Americana, you know, the Galleria, but we don't all know like the nuances of, you know, maybe business districts that serve the, you know, the Armenian community. And those are the kind of nuances that we need from all of you in terms of the people telling us, hey, this is a community of interest. This is why. You know, we get some people who may say, oh, you know, we want to make sure that this is all complete because it includes, you know, a significant portion of our community. Or we may have other people that may say, hey, you know, we are a community that is dependent on this transportation system, or we're a community that is centered around this community, you know, center, and this is, we want to make sure that we're all in the same district. Number five, geographically compact. As much as possible, when district lines are drawn, we need to make sure that they're as compact as possible so that an elected representative representative, won't be driving like 3 hours to get from one end of their district to the other end. I mean, obviously in LA that is possible, even though it may be as compact as possible. But, as much as we can, we want to try to make it so that they're not so widespread that it's going to be hard for them to get from, one end to the other. And where practicable, nesting. So each Senate district should be comprised of 2 complete and adjacent assembly districts, and Board of Equalization districts should be comprised of 10 complete and adjacent Senate districts. So you can imagine how large those Board of Equalization districts can be. Lastly, in addition, the place of residence of any incumbent or political candidate may not be considered in the creation of a map, and districts may not be drawn for the purpose of favoring or discriminating against an incumbent political candidate or political party. Now, number 10, I just want to just briefly mention, we're not the only game in town when it comes to redistricting. Counties, cities, school districts, water districts, community college districts, there's lots of redistricting efforts that are going on around the state. For example, in the county and city of LA, they also too created their own independent redistricting commissions as well too. So they will be also looking for input from people within the county as well as people within the city of Los Angeles as well too. I know that San Diego also has, both the city and county of San Diego also has an independent redistricting commission as well too. So, there's a movement afoot to have more independent redistricting. Again, I think because it does create for more fair representation, or the possibility of more fair representation. So, what created the Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission here in California? It created history. Prior to 2010, it was elected officials in California that drew the lines, and if the legislature failed to properly draw the lines, then the court stepped in. But in 2008, California voters passed Proposition 11, which was called the Voters First Act, authorizing the creation of an independent commission to draw new district lines for the state Senate, state assembly, and Board of Equalization. In 2010, Proposition 20 created the Voters First Act for Congress, which added the responsibility of drawing congressional lines to the work of the commission. So our goal as a commission is to spread the word to as many people as possible that, the people's role did not end with being counted in the census. We want to collect input from all of you because it is valuable to us to assist us in the process of drawing these new district maps. The 2010 census or 2010 Redistricting Commission was California's first independent commission. And the 2020 Commission is building upon the work that they started. And what we're doing is actually we're collecting information and we're calling it lessons learned so that we can then pass on our lessons to the 2030 Commission when they are seated in 2030. Other states do also have independent commissions, not a lot, but there are several, as you'll see here on the slide. Just want to briefly tell you about how we as a commission were selected. It started with over 20,000 applicants, which was then pared down to 2,000 individuals that were invited to submit a supplemental application. That number was then pared down to 120 people who were invited to interview, and then that was cut in half to 60, and of those names, they were forwarded to the legislature. Each party was allowed strikes. They were allowed to strike 8 from the Republican pool, 8 from the Democrat pool, and 8 from the no party preference pool, which left 36 remaining applicants. And just imagine, the lotto, where the ping pong balls, just go flying and you draw from it. 8 names were drawn in that way. And so the first 8 members of the commission, 3 Democrats, 3 Republicans, and 2 that are not affiliated or no party preference were selected in July of 2020. And then the final 6 were selected by the first 8, 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, 2 no party preference were then selected by the first 8 in August 2020. And so, so that we can have a diverse commission. I'm, really proud to be a part of this commission. There are 8 that are women, 6 that are men. Of the 14, there are 5 Republicans, 5 Democrats, 4 no, not affiliated or no party preference. We're from across the state, from Northern, Central, and Southern California. Our professions are very, diverse in that way as well too. We're nonprofit leaders to engineers to law enforcement to professors, lawyers, people who work in government. Just a very diverse group of people. Where you could see from our pictures, we're diverse also in our age, from those in the 30s to those in their 60s, and so we're everything in between. And so really, really happy that we reflect so many different diversities. So what do? We have 2 basic duties that I feel that I want to really emphasize to you. So one is what we're doing, or what I'm doing today, which is to really educate folks on redistricting, because again, we want eventually to get your input. And when I say eventually, not during this meeting, but during later meetings and in other meetings, we want input from you. Tell us about your communities. Second duty that we have is to draw the new electoral maps. And what you'll see down at the bottom is an example using Sacramento, what some of the maps could look like in terms of Congress, which will be drawing 52 districts, state Senate, which will be drawing 40, state Assembly, which will be drawing 80, and Board of Equalization, which will be drawing 4 districts. Now, one of the other things that we've done as a commission is California is very large, so what we've done is we've broken it up into different zones, so that, and we've assigned a commissioner to each zone, mainly so that we make sure that no zone gets left behind or forgotten or overlooked. We take very seriously, making sure that we hear from all across and every Californian if we can. And so I just want to make sure that you see that this is also something that we're doing, to ensure that we can reach and connect with the people of California, so that people can also have opportunities to get education, these education presentations, and also when we go into these zones, to later hear from each of the citizens or people of California in these particular regions. All right, so one of the most important parts of the input that we're looking for is communities of interest input. So when drawing maps, we have to be mindful of these communities of interest. And as I mentioned earlier, we can find city and county information. We could see the neighborhoods generally in terms of what's on a map, but it's the communities of interest information that is going to be much harder. And so communities of interest are defined as a concentrated population which shares common social and economic interests that should be included within a single district for the purposes of its effective and fair representation. Examples will include areas in which people share similar living standards, have similar cultures, use the same transportation facilities, have similar work opportunities, or have access to the same media. People can belong to multiple communities of interest, where we live, where we work, where we play can be different. And so we should be commenting on all of those different communities of interest in which we belong. Keep in mind that a community of interest is not the same as an electoral district, but it is, they do form, communities of interest do form the key building blocks of a district. So there are multiple ways in which you can define and describe your communities of interest to us. One is, and let me tell you about 2 specific ways. So what is, orally, you can come, you could testify at a public input meeting. You can even leave us a voicemail and tell us the story, tell us the stories about your communities. You could share examples of the things that make members, that make your community uniquely what it is. What do your members of your community have in common? Just imagine maybe describing your community to a visitor from out of town. Does your neighborhood share certain celebrations or traditions? Are there important places where your community gathers? What is the history of how your community came together? Again, this can be done, during one of the public input meetings. Um, Another way in which you could tell us about your community is in writing, and a written description can tell us lots of different things. You could describe it, and I just want to acknowledge some people rather speak, verbally and tell us the stories verbally. Others of us may feel more comfortable, telling our stories in writing and describe what connects, your community and why it's important that it be kept together during this redistricting, during this process of redistricting, as we think about creating these electoral lines, whenever possible, include statistics, including data on ethnicity, religious groups, education, graduation, median household income. Those are just some examples. Use reliable sources such as the Census Bureau. And this is important because as you tell us about it, that this will help us to also take into consideration those nuances as we draw the district lines. Now, as you tell us about your communities of interest, in addition to the oral and written testimony, there's also the visual. So the boundary maps. You can create a map of your neighborhood or area. You can mark the street names or the significant locations. You can, mark the significant landmarks or the gathering places. It may even be helpful for you to give a name to your community if you don't already have one, so that, it helps to create an understanding of what makes your community unique. And so one of the ways in which you could submit not only a written testimony, but also the map is through the use of what's called the Communities of Interest tool that we have a website for, drawmycacommunity.org. We will also have a paper version of our Communities of Interest tool that will be downloadable with a, already a prepaid postage on it. Now, I do want to also note one more thing in terms of why should communities be involved in telling us your stories, whether it's, verbally or in writing, and sharing your maps with us. Communities get involved because they sometimes feel like their issues have not been addressed by their elected representatives. Highlighting your community's interest in your stories and in your community of interest testimony can help to demonstrate the importance of not only helping us, the commission, to understand, but it also helps to highlight the importance of why your communities want elected officials who will understand and respond to your community's needs. Sometimes communities feel like they just haven't had that, and so this is an opportunity for you to come together to tell us why it's important to have people who understand the need for the kind of services, the kind of, having better schools or roads or even health centers, being able to have people who can understand and recognize your community is also an important part of telling us about your communities of interest. All right, so there, as I mentioned, there are ways, but at its most basic, it is describe it, whether it's verbally or orally, or in writing, draw the map, and then send your testimony or provide your testimony to the commission, either in writing by email, through the Communities of Interest tool, or come and tell us in public testimony during one of the public input meetings about your communities of interest. So here are some of the ways in which you could do that. As I mentioned, there are multiple ways. One is through the Communities of Interest Mapping tool, drawmycacommunity.org. It's actually a really cool, easy to use tool. And I say that because I am the least technical a person. And when I first heard about it and heard about I have to draw a map of my community, I'm like, okay, wait, one, I am the worst kind of artist. I was really nervous. But when I got the demonstration, I'm like, oh, this is super easy. And I will also confess sometimes, when it gets too hard, I just, kind of get into a panic, and I thought, oh, okay, this is not that bad. And like I said, there will also be a pre-point form where you could literally, create a map and draw your community. You can also go to the website to access the the Communities of Interest mapping tool. You could email us, and we're getting emails now from people who just send us an email and say, we, make sure that you keep our community intact. This is our community. Some come with maps, some don't. So far, what I've seen hasn't come with the maps per se, but we do get lots of emails, and I would just encourage you, if emails your way, send us an email. You could also phone and call us and leave us a voicemail. And you could also send us via mail, a letter describing, what your communities of interest is. I do want to also mention the Communities of Interest mapping tool. We're really proud that we do have the tool available in multiple languages, and tutorials on how to use it. But like I said, it's actually pretty easy. But for those, you may want to, for those of you who are not sure, you want to make sure you're doing it right. The tutorials are also available. One of which I'm really happy to say, we have it available in Armenian. So for those of you who are bilingual, you may be kind of agnostic as to whether you have it in English or in Armenian, but, for those of you who might want your parents or your grandparents, people in your community to be able to also provide input, but they are more comfortable doing so in the language that is most comfortable for them. This is a great way for you to do it together, and you could even then show them the example and how to do it in a language that they're comfortable with. So that's something else that I want to also note. We're also talking about, this isn't official yet, but we've also had conversations, because I know that the millennial and Gen Z generation is really comfortable with videos. We've started a conversation about whether or not, people should submit their testimony in video. I would say, how could that be any worse than leaving a voicemail? But we're still talking about it. But just something to keep in mind for those of you who are the TikTok generation. That might be something that might be a way for more people to participate. Okay, so as I mentioned about having the Communities of Interest tool available in multiple languages, I do want to just acknowledge and say that language access is very important to us. We have taken several steps to ensure that as many Californians as possible can participate in the process. So we do also have a number of materials translated into 12 different languages. Again, one of which includes Armenian. And I want to just note that we have a fact sheet, we have a frequently asked questions sheet. We even have this redistricting basics presentation available and translated into multiple languages. So, I would just say that if you wanted to take this and, be able to speak to more members of the community and do the presentation in Armenian, please go to our website, download the presentation that was translated into Armenian, and please utilize it to help educate more folks in your community so that they too can participate in this process. I do also want to say that we will be providing interpretation services upon request for both our business meetings. If anybody wants to make comment about any of the topics that we're discussing, as long as we have 5 days advance notice so that we can arrange for the interpreters. Also, if anybody wants to send us input or comments in writing, it can be done in any format or language, and it will be translated into English. So if any of your members want to send us testimony in Armenian, that's great, that's fine, and we'll have it translated. When we start the public input meetings, which by the way, our first one will take place on June 10th, so it's just around the corner. Again, for anybody who wants to make public testimony, you can please submit a request to us within 5 days, and we will have an interpreter arranged. I will also mention that one of the meetings for the greater LA area, one of the meetings, we do have Armenian as one of the days in which we will ensure that if there are people from the Armenian speaking community that would like to come and give testimony on the same day, we have designated a certain day where we will plan to have an interpreter, and that we would encourage your members to consider giving public testimony if they want in person. Not everybody will want to give testimony. It's going to be virtual. People I know sometimes get nervous and would rather not do it. Therefore doing it in writing or another way using the communities of interest tool is an option. But some people want to be able to speak and to share publicly, and so that's something that I would encourage all of your members to consider doing if that's their preference. Multiple avenues to give input, whatever's comfortable for them. I just want to encourage them to please really consider giving input. I just want to mention that obviously COVID has delayed a lot of things. Right now, the big conversation is when will we submit our final maps? We thought originally that we were going to get the census numbers a lot earlier. So according to a ruling by the state Supreme Court, we were supposed to submit our final maps by December 15th. We're right now in the process of really trying to figure out what that date is. If you're interested, like I said, come on to our business meetings. That is one of the big conversations that we're going back and forth on. We're hearing from a lot of advocacy organizations that have different opinions upon what that date should be. But we are working to really ensure that our ultimate decision about when we'll be able to submit our final maps, it's not necessarily arbitrary on our part. We have to work with not only the legislature, but also the state Supreme Court about ensuring, what is a date that is the legally mandated date, but doing so in a way that does not impact the 2022 primary elections. Because as you can imagine, the further delayed we get, then the more it's going to impact the primary dates for 2022. So as you could see here, there's a big range. Legally, I believe we have until February, but again, nothing is done in a vacuum, and the state elections officials are concerned about, receiving or having electoral district lines that are submitted in February that could adversely affect those primary dates. So we're trying to be very thoughtful about what does make sense. So that concludes my presentation. I just want to repeat again that I cannot take any public input, but I do welcome any questions about just redistricting and the presentation that I just made. I want to encourage anybody, hey, you can follow us on social media if you want. If you know of any other organizations that would want this presentation, please contact our redistricting commission staff. And with that, Edward, I'm going to turn this back over to you. And maybe what I'll do is I'll stop sharing so that if you want, we can see folks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for this wonderful and informative presentation. I wanted to voice a few of the questions that we've heard from community members in attendance today. The first being, how can we best keep up to date on the upcoming meetings and events in this commission?
Oh, thank you for asking that question. So great question. One is go to our website. You could sign up for, we have an e-newsletter that does come out, and it will keep everybody, informed on what's happening, what we're doing. Also, our social media is another great way to keep up with what we're doing. As I mentioned, we have the Facebook, we have the Instagram, we have the LinkedIn, we have the Twitter. Please feel free to, and YouTube too, because recordings like this are available, so you could watch recordings of our previous meeting if you're curious about what we talked about and what the discussion has been about. Also, if you go on to our website for the Redistricting Commission, what you will see is also previous agendas, as well as all of the handouts. You'll also see, the public comment that has also been made, not necessarily on redistricting, but just comments in general about the about redistricting and what we're doing. So our website is redrawthelinesca.org. So redrawthelinesca.org. So that's a perfect place to go.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. The next question that I have is, at this time, do we know which districts are currently on watch for redistricting? And I know that you mentioned it's a little bit up in the air, but is there an anticipated release date for the information on areas affected by the redistricting?
No, and that's something that is going to be hard to say. To be honest, that's all part of the redistricting, the redrawing of the electoral lines. So, yeah, that I couldn't tell you, and I honestly don't know right now.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that as well. Another follow-up that I wanted to ask: are there any hard dates that we should be aware of regarding the redistricting planning process? The most important of which, I'm assuming, is going to be June 10th for the first public hearing. Is that correct?
Yes, and that is going to definitely be one of the first statewide public input meetings. We have also made, just so that everybody knows, we have also made, at least for right now, a decision to go to an appointment process, because I know that it's hard, right? You want to testify, you want to give input, but you have to literally get yourself into the queue, and who knows when you'll be able to give that testimony. So we wanted to give some measure of ability for everybody to plan, especially those who are working and can't just sit on a phone call, or a Zoom call all day waiting to, hear, when they might be able to, give their testimony. And so we will be going to an appointment process. I want to just encourage everybody, go onto our website, and what you'll see is, for the last meeting that we had, that was yesterday and the day before, the May 24th and 25th meetings, you'll see that there is a handout that speaks to proposed dates for the public input meetings. And on it, you'll also see Zone H is the LA area, and you'll see the date where we do intend to have Armenian interpretation available, as long as we get people who want that interpretation. And so we will be holding slots available for Armenian interpretation up to 5 days. As long as we have, even one person that says, hey, I need an interpreter in Armenian. Of course, people can bring their own interpreters. They don't have to use ours, but if they don't and they want, us to provide the interpretation, that's fine. After the 5 days, if no one has requested the designated interpretation, we will open it up for just anybody. But I also do want to say that you don't have to limit yourself to that specific day. We are aware that that day may not be convenient, and so anyone is welcome to request interpretation on any other day for essentially any other zone, even. Because it just happens to be a convenient day for them. And so that's what I would call our some of the hard deadlines. The other deadlines that you may want to keep an eye out for, we're expected to receive the census numbers in mid-August. The statewide database, which will process the numbers so that the Redistricting Commission can use the numbers. We're expected to have those numbers ready to use by the end of September, at which point the commission will, in earnest, really start the process of line drawing. But up until that point, right now, we're trying to collect as much public input early as we can.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I have a follow-up question about that. So there is a 5-day period in which one can actually request an Armenian interpreter. But is there a deadline at which someone has to make the request to provide their testimony at the hearing?
Yeah, great question. You know, that one, I'm going to say it's still to be determined. We just made the decision that we are going to go to a appointment process. I'm going to say most likely what it's going to be is as soon as the the appointment slot times open up, we're going to encourage everybody to, make an appointment sooner rather than later, so that then, the time that they might want. And this part, I will say, we're still working out whether or not you could pick your time or whether you'll be assigned a time. I'm not sure, but I would just say, just like with anything, the earlier you do it, the more likely you'll have a time that you like. In terms of the interpretation, I would just even say, because you could see the dates that the public input meetings are going to be taking place now, especially the date that we have, we're holding for Armenian interpretation. If you know that, community members already want interpretation, you could start to say, you can make the request now. You could say, hey, we saw that there's interpretation that will be made available and it's set aside on this date. We want to make a request on behalf of our community members. We're planning to bring, X number of people, or, your community members can do so on their own as well too. If they already know that they want to make that, that testimony.
Perfect. Okay, thank you very much. That's an important question that you answered. Okay, so I have just a couple more that I wanted to make sure that we touched on. The first one is, what is the scope of these public meetings? Is it going to be just a Q&A? Is it going to be an open forum? Like, what exactly is the scope?
Oh, that's a great question. Okay, so this is all the things that we're working out now, but the public input meetings is to collect public input, each person's input about their communities of interest. Now, like I said, there are multiple ways in which people can provide the commission with your thoughts on what you believe is a community of interest that is important to you. You could use the communities of interest tool and the website that we have. You could write, a letter or send us an email. You could, give us a voicemail, or you can attend one of these public input meetings. Now, during this public input meeting, each person will be given 3 minutes if you're speaking in English. If a person needs interpretation, we will be giving a total of 6 minutes, 3 minutes for the testimony and then 3 minutes for the interpretation of the testimony. So each person, if you come to the meeting and you want to tell us about what about your community of interest, you have 3 minutes to describe it. You could submit to us in advance a map and say, I want to show this and I want to describe it and I want to tell the commission why this is a community of interest, what makes it a community of interest. And you have 3 minutes. And basically what's going to happen is that it is going to be, it's going to be one person right after the other doing the same thing, telling us about the community of interest. So this is a way for us to hear and also collect the testimonies. We will also be reading all of the communities of interest input that we give through the communities of interest input tool. And we're also now in the process of working out a way in which we will also have a way to have all that testimony and all that input analyzed as well too, so that we can take that into account for our line drawing.
Perfect, thank you. I was gonna ask how these things are kind of factored in together. So at the moment, it's still in the works, but do we know when we will have that information available to us?
In terms of the analysis, I would just say the best way is to follow along. The analysis is what we're going to use to draw the lines. So, at its most basic, I would say once the commission starts drawing the new lines, it will be based on all of the input, and you'll see how it's all being utilized in terms of the maps that we create. What we'll be doing is we'll be creating a set of draft maps that we'll then put out to, all of the people of California to then react to. And then the communities will have, I believe it's 5 days. Don't quote me on this, but it's something like I think it's like about 5 to 7 days, maybe up to 2 weeks. It's more closer to 5 days, I believe, to give us feedback on the draft electoral district maps that are drawn. And then what we'll do is we'll go back and then we'll make changes. Conceptually, we're going to make changes. Hopefully, we'll have done such a great job the first time that people will be pretty happy with it. But what we'll do is we'll go back and we'll take in, additional feedback that we get from everybody, based on the draft maps, make additional changes, and then we'll be submitting, final maps. And again, once we get to the final maps, there will be a comment period where, again, people can make comments, and then it will be submitted to the Secretary of State.
Understood. Okay, thank you very much. You answered multiple questions with that one there. The last thing I would like to ask you is, what would be the best way for our community members to secure a spot when they would like to provide their testimony on it?
Again, I would just say, get onto our email list, because we'll be making an announcement when appointments do begin to open. Social media is also another good one as well too, because we'll be making announcements on social media as well as through the e-newsletter list as distribution as well too.
Excellent. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. You've thoroughly answered all of our questions.
Great.
I wanted to thank you again for this wonderful and educational experience, and we sincerely look forward to advocating and working with you and other commissioners.
Thank you, and thanks for having me again as well too.
Yes, it was a pleasure. So thank you again, Commissioner Linda Akutagawa. Community members, you will be hearing from us on next steps, and in general, I would like to thank everyone here for their participation in service to our community.
Thank you.
Wonderful. All right.
All right.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.